let's talk about Tony Todd, because I
Yes.
love that guy, and he's so awesome in this role, and he's so convincing. Um, he's such a complete character as far as a villain goes, where he has depth and a story to him, and um, motive and growth as well as far as a bad guy goes. It's pretty impressive, especially for 92.
Yeah, I think it's wild that originally they had planned to have Eddie Murphy was the original choice for this role, but apparently they couldn't afford him. But that's a rumor. They say it was denied by the director, but he was of the original choice for the role, um, which
Mhm.
is bananas. So I think that Tony Todd is definitely the right choice in terms of bringing the gravitas of it. Like he's theatrically trained. He's a classic actor. He has this sort of classic composition to the role, and I appreciate that he saw in this character this kind of comparison to like Phantom of the Opera, Hunchback of Notre Dame, these like monsters that use uh, both like terror and tenderness to try and win over the love of a female protagonist. And he seems to really kind of understand the complexity of this character, that he is a tragic figure. He's a serial killer in a way, but he also has this really tragic backstory. And I think Tony Todd does a wonderful job of actually bringing that to the forefront. So he is a sympathetic villain at the same time.
Yeah, because I think if you compare him to some other characters throughout film, especially the 90s, like his story could very easily become like one of vengeance, and he could easily be the hero in the story.
Absolutely.
And I think that you made a point about a great point we were talking before we got on the air, but like about his shoes.
Hmm.
And do you want to talk about, because I didn't actually notice that, to be honest, but it's funny because I had a note as well tying into shoes. So, but you go. Like, what did you like? Explain
Yeah.
what you
So
saw.
I noticed when he's walking in the parking garage, when he kind of first have that introduction between him and Helen, when they first kind of have that meeting, you see and you hear Helen's footsteps as she's walking through this concrete parking garage, but the Candyman's just silent. Like he's walking, but it has close-ups on his feet. So you see him walking, but it's completely devoid of that sound of his footsteps. You just hear hers, which has this really kind of supernatural, mythological element to it, that it just kind of, he seems just not quite real. He's very like fantastical that way. He's just kind of, almost like a figment of your imagination, but he does exist. He is physically there. So I just thought that was such a cool, creepy detail. I think is just such a nifty way to introduce that character and highlight the fact that he is not quite of this world anymore.
Yeah, and I thought, like when you mentioned that, it's kind of it jogged something in my mind too, because I had a note about how awesome the backstory is, and it's tragic and
Hmm.
it's brutal and it's sad ultimately. But it is complex. Like it's not just a thing. I always feel like in the 80s and 90s they put like a little bit of thought into this stuff, and
Yeah.
I know we compare 90s movies to current movies all the time. I feel like sometimes we don't get that backstory at all. Like, what's this guy's deal, or what's this gal's deal? Like,
Hmm.
what's this character been through? Like, where have they come from? You have a really clear understanding. They do it in kind of a clever way where it's um they establish Helen, and she's talking to like her husband Trevor's friend, who's this sort of pompous, professor at dinner,
Hmm.
and who I think is a funny character. But and he said, "Well, I'm the expert, basically. Like, look at all this stuff I know." And it's like he's kind of like this, yeah, like I said, he's this pompous, arrogant kind of guy. And he laughs in her face because she's doing her thesis on Candyman. But also as well, he does know some stuff, and he kind of explains to it. So it kind of gives it some credibility, because they
Hmm.
do seem like facts as far as how the legend is created. But in there, he says um, that his father, Candyman's father, was like a basically he made a machine that made shoes or something like in that,
Hmm.
which is such a throwaway detail, and one that you're like, well, that doesn't really have anything to do with Candyman, but it does tie into the
Hmm.
idea that he was almost like he was in the upper echelon of society, like he was almost
Right.
like an aristocrat. When you mentioned that about the shoes, it's like, is that because the shoes are so well made, they're so soft
Hmm.
that they don't make any noise? I don't know, but hey,
Ooh, the plot
that's
thickens.
just what I thought when you mentioned that. I
Yeah.
didn't notice the shoes. I was still focused on a couple other things. I think one of the really and the reason I missed that, the thing that I noticed is that Candyman actually doesn't show up until the halfway point in this movie. And I think that's
Huh.
so important,
Mhm.
because you hear him, but you
Yeah.
don't see him. Like, you hear the stories about him,
Yeah.
the kind of the fake Candyman that's sort of, he's the imposter Candyman that is
Yeah.
sort of using the legend to scare the residents and keep them in line, around Cabrini Green.
Right.
Like, he's not Candyman. You don't ever see him until that parking lot scene.
Yeah.
And
He's just kind of the whispers in the wind before that, which is,
yeah, and that's
haunting.
what's so fun about that's what's so fun about going back and watching these movies, because you never think about that when you first see them because we were kids, right? So,
Yeah.
and when you watch it, it's like it is very much like, let's say, like Jaws or other films that the monster kind of you gives it some time to show up and become this
Mhm.
threatening thing. Tony Todd as well. Like I've met him in person, at a couple of Comic Cons and whatever. He's a super imposing figure. Like,
Oh,
he
yeah.
is like a massive dude, and
Yeah.
like, you look up to him, and I remember a funny story. Like, I was like, we were at a convention once, and we just got into an elevator. There were all these people going into an elevator, so I just got into an elevator, and like, the elevator had all mirrors inside, and Tony Todd standing at the back of the elevator, like, just going up to his room or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, we got into the thing, and I was just like, the doors closed, and I said, "Okay, nobody get any ideas, okay?" Like, seriously. And he chuckled right in the back, and I was, "Ah, that's good."
Yeah.
So, but yeah, but in that scene as well. Like, what's crazy to me is, like, kind of the scene after that is this is a pretty wild scene, because it's the murder scene, the first murder, right?
Yeah.
Where she wakes up and she's in the apartment, and yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going to get censored on radio, so I just want to be careful here, but like, basically, yeah, there's a dog that doesn't make it, and
Mhm.
there's a
It's
baby that goes missing, and there's a lot of blood in that scene.
Yeah.
And
If you
it's
go to
so
doesthedogdie.com, the answer is yes.
That's right, and
Yeah.
which is a site that I believe just warns you if a
It
dog
does. It
is
does.
gonna die,
Yeah.
right? So,
Mhm.
but it's a crazy scene because it's such a dreamlike sequence that when you first meet Candyman and you're like, "Oh, well, maybe he isn't that threatening. Maybe he's just," and then it cuts to
Misunderstood.
this other scene, and it's absolute mayhem,
Yeah.
and it's a very visceral scene as well. You don't necessarily see a lot of the violence; it's just the aftermath. But it's. I mean, I think the film, as soon as he shows up, flips pretty convincingly, from the first half of the film, which is sort of this like research thesis thing,
Right.
over to like complete madness and a spiral into insanity. Um,
Mhm.
I
With an
think it's
excellent
super
performance
effective.
from Vanessa E. Williams too, like, her reaction in that scene when she when Helen kinda wakes up and Anne Marie McCoy is just losing it is fascinating. Like, she does such an incredible job of just conveying how, traumatized and how horrific this whole scene is. So you just wake up to hear her screaming and, blood all over the floor, and it's a really impactful scene because, like you said, he's just kinda coming out of this very, somewhat romantic, dreamy sequence, and you think like, "Oh, maybe he's just, kind of a brooding bad boy type of character." But no, he's pretty violent.
Brooding
It's just
bad boy.
but
Well, well, he does have a hook for a
he
hand.
does have
That's
a
like
hook,
dumb.
that's pretty bad boy behavior right there, I think. Uh, I did
Noted.
mention bad boys take note.